India development debate. Call it Uncle Sam's Diwali gift for India. The US has allowed New Delhi to continue with oil imports from Iran, which will be facing economic sanctions come Monday. Now, this is big news for us because remember, India meets more than 80% of its crude oil requirements through imports, including from Iran. Now, while the Trump administration's move is aimed at capping any potential spike in international oil prices, it also wants to send out a message to the world that sanctions against Iran are not meant to inconvenience its trade allies. Oil prices are already on the mend on the talk that some of the big importers of Iran oil, including Japan, China and South Korea, will get exemptions from US sanctions. The big boost for India's oil economy is our topic of discussion this evening, and joining in, we've got three special guests for just that. Vivek Rai, he's the former Petroleum Secretary. We've got Talmiz Ahmed, the former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, UAE and Oman, joining in. And so does Shubhanti Ray Tadwal, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. All three of you, very good evening and thank you so much for taking time out for us. Mr. Rai, let me begin by asking you, the US has agreed to grant India a waiver from Iran sanctions, allowing us basically to continue to import about 1.25 million tons of oil a month, at least up until March, from Tehran. How much of a short-term relief would you say this is?
Well, I think this is a relief, and this is on the lines of what was done the last time sanctions were in place. So what the US would probably like you to do is to reduce the amount of oil you're importing from Iran over a gradual period, but not to cut it off immediately, because I think the US also realizes that countries like India, which are highly import dependent, cannot just cut off their supplies of oil, which are critically required for the Indian economy. So it's a short-term relief, but it's in pattern with what was done on the earlier occasion.
Okay. It's a short-term relief. Shubhanti, by reducing our oil imports from Iran, are we also somewhere running the risk of straining our finances? You know, given we currently pay 45% of this import bill in rupees, the rest 55% in euros, could our energy bill not shoot up?
Well, actually, if we had stopped completely importing from Iran, that would have hurt us even more, because at least partially, even if it's just 45%, we are still paying in rupees. And given the rupee devaluation, imagine if we had to pay the entire amount in dollars. So that definitely would be a relief.
Okay. Mr. Ahmed, Brent oil prices have, fallen nearly 15% from over $85 a barrel last month, largely on speculation that some of these nations, including India, will get waivers. There are hopes that other OPEC members will pump more to sort of offset any supply gaps. If you were to look at the oil markets, they're unusually calm just before, these sanctions hit us. Can the Saudis, the Russians and OPEC help meet the shortfall, you think? Should we be holding our breath?
There is extraordinary uncertainty surrounding the entire situation. On the one hand, the Americans have decreed that a huge quantum of oil should be deliberately withdrawn from the market. And this is likely to have an impact on prices. At the same time, they have told their allies in the OPEC that they must produce much more so that prices are stable. So we have a very complex scenario where you have OPEC elements trying to compensate for something that is completely unacceptable. What the Americans have decreed has no logic whatsoever in terms of politics or economics. And yet they want to have the cake and eat it too. They want to, they want to withdraw so much oil from the market, but the market needs that oil. So you have a very artificial scenario where you have a few countries desperately trying to compensate for this extraordinary dramatic withdrawal of oil from a country that has done no wrong. It is being penalized by a country only on the basis that that country is a powerful entity and has a significant role in world affairs. Iran has done no wrong. It has not violated any treaty, and yet it is being penalized, and the international community is being penalized at the same time.
Let's talk about, Mr. Rai, the context and, keeping in mind India. For now, as you sort of detailed in your first answer, you don't really see a problem and, we've dealt with situations like this in the past. But, you've also had the United States very clearly say that its eventual goal is to ensure that Iranian imports get to zero. In that light, what are the options before both India and Iran and, our trading relations beyond March?
I think that would really complicate the situation, and that is a situation with which not only India but China, Japan, South Korea would also have to contend, because going to zero imports from Iran is something that did not happen on the last occasion that sanctions were in place, and whether it happens on this occasion remains to be seen. But if it does happen, then there would be massive complications, and I think countries like China, Japan, India, South Korea and other importers from Iran would have to take a call about what to do next, because beyond a point, we can't be dictated to by other powers for something which is vital to our national security. And you must not forget that Iran is a very large proven reserves of oil and gas. Oil, they're pretty high up in the rankings, and on gas, I think with Russia they have the largest reserves of gas. So it's very much in India's strategic interest to maintain good relations with Iran, to maintain consistent relations with Iran, and to build bridges with them so that in future our energy requirements are met from Iran either over land or through sea or whatever means. So I think for India it would be a very, very difficult situation, and we would have to find a way out of it, because we cannot give up our old relationship with Iran under any circumstances.
Shrimati, let me ask you that question in a slightly different way. What are the chances that we're going to be staring at a scenario where basically, the US is going to arm twist economies like ours to cut down their imports from Iran to absolute zero? And if that were to happen, of course, it's going to muddy the waters. But then what are the options going to be before us?
I don't think that's likely. I don't think we are going to give in. I think the government has made it very clear we are not going to be pushed into something that is not in our interest. Secondly, Iran has been, since the JCPOA, since the deal was signed, Iran has been selling about 2.5 million barrels a day into the market. And even though the Americans and OPEC have said they are going to be increasing their production and releasing more supplies, the fact is 2.5 million barrels a day is going to be very difficult to kind of substitute. Besides, there are outages from other. Venezuela is in a problem. Libya has now come back, but there are, off and on, there are other producers have also had outages. So it's going to have a tremendous cascading effect on oil prices, and every importing country is going to suffer. And I don't think that will happen. But in the event that something that we are pushed into, very, very unlikely, I reiterate, that we are going to be pushed into cutting our imports down to zero, then I think some kind of a negotiation or deal will have to be done that we don't have to pay such a heavy economic price for something like that. I don't think it's going to come to that.
Okay.
In any case, yes, we are taking all contingent steps. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Ahmed, India is really treading a very fine line here, isn't it? On one hand, we have to look at our interests, and that is to sort of continue importing oil from Iran given the favorable terms. On the other hand, we can't really afford to alienate ourselves from the United States, especially at a time, when, as it is, there's a lot of friction over trade issues.
India is fortunately in a position that it cannot be cowed down by any power, however mighty it might be. As far as I can see, the US position is completely untenable. It is illegal and it is not acceptable at all. As far as India is concerned, yes, we do value our relationship with the Americans, but every relationship has to take into account the interests of the other side. Now here we have a scenario where we have a robust economic relationship also with the Iranians. We have major exports to the Iranians. Are we going to tell our exporters that they have to stop everything overnight? We sell about $3 or $4 billion worth of goods to the Iranians. We can't stop that overnight only because Donald Trump has dictated that. I think India is going to make it very clear to the Americans that there is a line beyond which we will not be able to accept their views. And I think that has already been conveyed to the Americans very clearly. We have important long-term strategic interests in our relationship with the Iranians, and we value that relationship. If the Americans have certain issues with the Iranians, they should have negotiated those issues with the Iranians directly instead of creating this calamity in the international community. I personally believe that the sanctions are not sustainable, and I think that the entire regime will start breaking down fairly quickly within 6 months or a year.
Mr. Rai, what are the options before the Modi government to sort of secure energy needs, at the same time ensure that the energy bill doesn't shoot through the roof? You know, do you think that reviving rupee payments perhaps is one way? Will other oil producing nations want to adhere to India's request?
Well, as far as Iran is concerned, we did get into a barter arrangement and also rupee payments with them in the past, and the same thing could be done again. And the Iranians will use those rupees to purchase goods and services from India. As far as the other countries are concerned, I think, the oil is traded in dollar terms. So I don't see any country accepting a barter arrangement in rupee terms with India. So India has to live with a situation where it has to buy its oil priced in US dollars, and there's no escape from that. But in terms of diversifying the energy basket, I think that's where we are actually making some headway. And while we continue to be dependent on the Middle East and the Gulf, with Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Iran accounting for 50% of our crude oil imports, I think we've gone into Africa, we've gone into Latin America, and the proportion of crude oil coming in from these geographies, including the United States, is now becoming a slightly larger proportion of the total crude oil import basket. And that diversification is welcome, right, and I think it's also a sensible strategy.
Okay, Shubhanti, with alternative sources clearly getting costly, how do you see the political implications of all of this playing out? Given it's an election year, given that you've seen fuel fury sort of spill onto the streets, given that retail prices have gone through the roof.
Well, it's going to have a tremendous impact, I think, adverse impact on the economy and therefore on the elections. So definitely, I think the price of oil does play a part in elections, during elections. So the government is going to do whatever it can to ensure. But then at the end of the day, oil is a global commodity. It doesn't matter where it's produced or whoever is producing or not producing, it's going to have a cascading effect on the entire market because it is a fungible commodity. So it is going to impact, if this Iran thing happens or any other problem in the supply of oil in the market, it's going to resonate in the Indian economy, and it will have an impact on the elections, certainly.
Mr. Ahmed, do you think that the United States stance on Iran could even change depending on the outcome of the US election?
It won't change in the short term because the Trump presidency is totally committed to a very aggressive, hostile posture. It is an untenable posture, it is unreasonable, and the United States has got no support from any country besides Saudi Arabia and Israel. But the Trump posture has also made West Asia extremely unstable and extremely insecure. We have every reason to be concerned about the scenario beyond petroleum. Beyond petroleum, you have a deep divide between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Saudi Arabia has been encouraged quite a bit in this aggressive posture, as has Israel. So we do not have today any statesman-like position being adopted in Washington, D.C. You have indeed aggressive rhetoric and a confrontationist approach, and you find that the situation is getting completely out of hand. So beyond oil also we have very serious concerns beyond the short term. I think that in the medium term you could have, there is no evidence that there is moderation or sanity emerging in Washington, D.C. So unless there is a serious regime change in Washington DC, I do not believe that over the next 2 years you will see any dramatic change. Whether there should be some change, I certainly believe there should be. I think the Europeans finally have picked up courage and have decided that enough is enough. That they now have to emerge from the shadow of the United States and they must adopt a strategic posture as far as global issues are concerned and certainly as far as West Asia is concerned. I have great hope in that. So you will have new role players that will now emerge, Russia, China, India, and certain members of the European Union, possibly France and Germany. I believe they will now start playing a much more significant role in stabilizing West Asia. We have to now prepare for a post-US scenario in West Asia. The US has done enough damage in West Asia. It has destroyed communities and societies because of its military option and its aggressive policies, which have been entirely unilateral and unfair, unjust. So I think the silver lining in the scenario, as I see it, is that today we are seeing the end of US hegemony and the emergence of a new scenario with new role players who are now emerging to assume responsibility for regional and world affairs.
Mr. Raidu, weigh in on that. How much of a tough balancing act is it going to be on one side between geopolitical realities for us and the other side on energy security?
Well, it is a very tough balancing act because we have a very important relationship with the Middle East and we also have a very important relationship with the United States. And so it has to be a balancing act and you cannot forego one for the other. At some point in time, the red lines will have to be drawn and both parties will have to be told what those red lines are. So I think India can't really hunt with the hare or run with the hounds, or hunt with the hounds and run with the hares. And I think India's strategic relationship with the Middle East is absolutely invaluable. It's historical. It is critical for our energy security. It's also critical for our future potential energy supplies from in terms of gas and in terms of pipelines. So I think there are far more serious issues about the future of Indian energy. The Indian energy basket, which is presently hooked onto coal, will have to move towards gas, will have to move towards renewables, and we'll have to find ways of getting gas into India. The Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline has been in the works for a long time. It hasn't happened. Similarly, the Tapi pipeline has not happened. But China now has gas coming in from pipelines from Kazakhstan, from Central Asia and from Russia. And I think if we could somehow manage to get these pipelines in place through Pakistan and Afghanistan, it would actually transform the Indian economy. It would unleash forces of growth. And I think in that context, not only do we need to balance the Iranians with the US, but we also need to balance our relationship with Pakistan and find some give and take so that our energy security is actually going to be very seriously dependent on gas supplies. And if we could get that gas overland or subsea through the waters of, through the land of Pakistan or the waters of the Arabian Sea, it would be a game changer for India because the gas would be cheap. We could use it for power generation. We could reduce the use of coal. Thereby, we could actually contribute a huge amount to decarbonization of the Indian economy. And I think if you look at it in that context, the geopolitics of it demands not only that we maintain relationships with Iran, but we also mend relationships with Pakistan.
Shubhanti, talking about relationships with Iran, India has also invested some $500 million on the Chabahar port, which is our only gateway to Afghanistan. Now, if India was to replace Iranian oil imports, with those from either Saudi Arabia or any other countries, do you suspect that we could also, see a bit of a reaction from Tehran? Could sort of Iran hit back, reduce India's involvement and the preferential treatment? Could we be, seeing Iran inviting China, for instance, to fill India's shoes there?
Oh, certainly. I think that is definitely something that we should take into consideration if we even consider, which again I reiterate we are not going to do, but just I don't think that we are going to be risking losing Chabahar, especially with Gwadar coming up, and risking our relations with Iran. Iran has in the past and recently also kind of given us soft warnings that we should continue to do business with them, and we will. We have geopolitical interests, we have long relations with Iran, which we are not going to jeopardize, whoever is going to pressurize us. But I'd like to say something else also before that, regarding the reaction of the world against Trump's bullying, or American bullying. I think the time has come to kind of move away from a dollar-based oil trade. And I think already a lot of countries are looking at considering that, and look at a basket of currencies with which to trade in oil. And I think that is really the trump card, if I would like it. I think that is going to take away a lot of the American heft, I think, in terms of threats on any country, or who especially is a major oil producer.
Right. Mr. Ahmed, my last question to you then, and I know you've sort of reiterated in all your answers that India is not one to sort of cower down to the demands of the US, but in the face of mounting American pressure on, cutting down our oil imports from Iran, do you think that we can maintain our independent foreign policy stance without, rubbing anyone the wrong way?
We've always done that. Why should we have any doubts about our capacity now? Remember 1947, a newly emerged country, extremely fragile, extremely vulnerable. It had just been divided. All its institutions were extremely weak. Even at that time, we refused to join the Western camp. Even at that time, we opted for the non-aligned movement. We refused to participate in this conflict that had been engineered between the West and the East. If we could take that posture in 1947, look at us today. Today, 70 years later, we are a very strong and extremely self-confident country. I think what we should look at is not whether we can manage our relationships. Yes, certainly we can. What we should do is to become proactively involved with the promotion of security. We should be contributors to the strategic scenarios in our region and in the world. We should no longer confine ourselves to South Asia. We should now look beyond South Asia to see how, with our capacity, with our prowess, with our leadership, that we can go forth and bring comfort and bring stability to countries that are important to us and to regions that are important to us. I have no doubt. What we are witnessing now is the end of the US era. It has been in the making for several years. I think Donald Trump marks the apogee of that. We should be now better prepared. We should have a new strategic culture, a culture that equips us so that we can assume responsibilities that have now emerged in the world order. We should work with important partners, and now it is in this way that we can now define and give shape to a new order that will be post-US hegemony.
All right. On that thought, I'm going to thank each one of you for taking the time out for us this evening. Mr. Vivek Rai, Talmiz Ahmed, and of course, Debanti Ray Tadwal. Thank you so much. With that, we wrap it up on this edition of the India Development Debate. Do stay tuned. Up ahead, of course, is Top 10 at 10.